Hi there, Frank Flegg here, founder of Ethical Property Partners, the place where we help committed investors to improve their returns on their portfolios by using sophisticated strategies. In fact, what we aim to do is to take your annual profits and help you to earn those on a monthly basis. Now, I often talk about auctions being a place where you can sell properties, but not a good place to buy properties. But there are a few caveats to that, and in this episode, I'm going to set you a challenge where I describe a property that I found at auction. I'm going to ask you then, I'm going to pause, I'm going to ask you to work out how you would monetize that property, and then I'm going to tell you how I've done it. So let me tell you about this property. It turned up, it was quite a close property to me. It's only a couple of miles from my house, and it turned up in auction, quite an interesting property, because it was a big schoolhouse, like an old boys' school from years and years ago. If you looked at it, it'd probably be an 8 or 12 bedroom house, something like that. So quite a big detached house, quite a lot of land behind it. In fact, it had a garden of about 1/3 of an acre, and then it had an acre and 1/4 of woodland behind that. Now, I wanted some woodland for my boys to be able to play in and light fires and go camping and stuff. And because it's quite close to my house, that was quite attractive to me. And that's what made it stand out in the auction catalogue, actually, because it had this land. So the land was available for £16,000 and the property was available for £82,000. I spoke to the auctioneer. I actually spoke to the vendor's lawyers and I said, look, would you accept £98,000 for both together? Those were the guide prices in the auction. Now, often the guide price is 10% less than the reserve price, but the vendor actually confided in their solicitor and allowed the solicitor to tell us that they would accept the guide price, which was a combined total of £98,000, 82 for the property and 16 for the land behind it. Now, you weren't getting the whole property, and this is why it's so cheap. You might be thinking, hang on a second, 82k for a big old school? No, it wasn't that. It was the big building that had been split into 4 flats, 4 one-bedroom flats. And the 2 ground floor flats had been sold years ago. And the 2 upstairs flats were currently tenanted, but it was those that were available. Now, I went through the legal pack with my lawyer. I kid you not, the leasehold that had been created or had tried to be created, I could have done a better job myself, and I'm not a conveyancer. The lawyer that had done this like 20 years ago had taken a freehold agreement, a freehold contract, and tried to just like change the words into leasehold, and so it wasn't a valid leasehold at all. In fact, what they had inadvertently created was 2 flying freeholds. So you had the flats below on the ground floor that owned the land beneath them, so they were freeholders, and then the flats above were flying freeholds. They just like float on these flats below them, which is a nightmare. There was no freeholder. There were just these 4 leaseholders. It was a nightmare. It made the top 2 flats unmortgageable, but it also meant there was no agreement between the 4 flats as to who would pay for maintenance. So if the roof leaks, the ones beneath could say, well, we're not getting wet, you fix the roof. And if there was subsidence, the one on top could say, well, subsidence doesn't bother us, you have to fix that, that crack in your wall doesn't affect us, or if there was rising damp, there wouldn't be an issue for the ones above. So it's a really unworkable situation, and it made all 4 of the properties unmortgageable, which suppressed their values. So I wasn't in direct communication with the vendor, and that always makes this hard. So it makes it really hard to do a structured purchase. But I was in touch with the lawyer, and the lawyer was quite amenable to doing a deal before auction. What you don't want to do is get into the auction room and be in competition with others. And so I offered to buy the land for £1,000. You'll notice I do this a lot because it creates unencumbered land, and that means you can do anything with it. You can title split it, you can get planning on it, you can sell it, and it makes it separate to the property that normally I will get lending on. Now, because it's unmortgageable, you might think, well, how are you going to get lending? But I had a chat with the vendor and I said, look, how can we do this? How can we do the deal? I'm going to pause now, and I want you to think about how you're going to structure this. Why would you want to buy 2 unmortgageable flats? How would you buy them? What would you do with the woodland, if anything? And how are you going to make this a deal moving forwards? Hey guys, welcome back. Hopefully you came up with a solution there. Let me tell you what I did with this deal. I went to a finance investor and I said, look, I've got a great deal here for £97,000. The flats, once I've turned them into leasehold flats, are going to be far more valuable than the 50 grand each that we're paying for them now, just under 50 grand each. In fact, they're going to be worth 75, 80 grand each as soon as we've split them into leaseholds. Are you willing to lend your money? I knew he had money to invest, and I'll pay you 5% per annum. He was more than happy with that. We set that up as a 5-year agreement. So he lent that money for 5 years at 5%, and I could then relax knowing that I had 5 years to sort out the leasehold. Now, the land at the rear was great. I took my kids camping. We've had parties there, we've had bonfires. It's great for them to have somewhere where they can just play with their mates, etc. Cost £1,000, which is brilliant, and now I've got a nice piece of woodland that potentially we'll get planning permission on. I've got a planning permission application in at the moment actually for a 6-bedroom detached house. If we get that planning permission, it hasn't been granted yet. If we do get it, it probably raises the value of that land from £16,000 now to probably £150,000. So great little layer of icing on the cake. I'm not in a hurry because the boys are using the land, I'm using the land, we have fun over there, etc. I cut my firewood there for our log burning stove at home, etc. But the property itself, I just bought it, I've got tenants in it, already had tenants in it, that pays the interest on the 5% loan from the investor, so it was cash flow positive from day one, no money down from day one other than the grand that I paid for the woodlands, so great, makes me a couple £100 a month, which is brilliant after all expenses. But what I did is I just waited for a maintenance issue to arise, and I knew one would because it's an old house. I made sure that when I first bought it, I introduced myself to the other owners. So I went and knocked on the door and said, "Hi, I'm Frank, I'm the new landlord above, you know, the tenants aren't changing." I obviously introduced myself to the tenants. "If you need anything, these are my contact details, nice to meet you. By the way, how do you sort out maintenance?" "Well, we kind of just chat about it." "Oh, okay, great." And I just waited. About 6 months later, the cast iron downpipe from the guttering came away from the house and it started leaning, and the downstairs guy, one of the downstairs guys, rents his property out, and it was where his tenant walked along the path and it was leaning, and he was worried it was going to fall on his tenant. Massive liability claim on him if that happened. And he said to the two of us, "This downpipe needs fixing, it's, I forget what it was, £200, who's willing to pay for it?" But the other downstairs tenant on the other side, it was not even on his side of the house, so that seems a bit unfair. And of course my flat's on the other side of the house, and I've got one flat on that side of the house, me owning the two at the top. So it could be, the argument could be made that all four of us pay a quarter each. The argument could be made that he pays for it entirely because it's his tenant that he's worried about, even though it's detached from my flat at the top. If I don't care about it, you know, he can pay for it all. Or you could say that, well, it's on our side of the building, his flat and my flat, so we pay half each. And so I said to him, "Look, I'm more than happy to pay my half, it's on our half of the building, let's do that." So we paid £100 each and got it fixed. I said, "But actually this does pose a bit of a problem for us. Can the three of us sit down and have a coffee?" So we met actually in the guy that lived there, the only one that lived there, in his flat, and I just had an open conversation with him, and I said, "Do you realise that it's suppressing the value of your property? So I've just picked these up for 49 each, or whatever it works out at, 48, 49,000 pounds each. But actually yours are worth the same at the moment because we've got this problem with the leasehold. If we just went to a local lawyer and got the leasehold sorted out with all four of us having a 999-year lease on the property and all four of us jointly owning the freehold for the building, it would instantly add value to our properties, probably 50% increase in the value because now they're mortgageable, so more people can buy them. Also, at the same time, we can write in a maintenance agreement which will generally, one would say is, all four of the flats are equally liable for all external maintenance. And so if there's a problem with the roof, all four of us pay for it. If there's subsidence, all four of us pay for it, regardless of where it is in the property, etc. Really common sense. And they saw the value in that. They said, "How much would it cost?" I'd already got a quote. It was just over £3,000. So I said, "It's going to cost about £700-800 each for each flat." Obviously they owned one flat each, I owned two, so I paid double, and they went for it. They said, "Yeah, that'd be great." So we incorporated a company that now owns the freehold. All four of the flats own equal shares in the freehold. At the same time, I split the title to give myself vehicular access to the woodland at the back because I want to apply for planning permission later on. And we also divided the parking spaces. There are 8 parking spaces in the back, so we made each of those linked to one flat. So it just tidied it all up, because before then, my flats owned the whole car park, but they had use of the car park. So I used that as a bit of a bargaining tool. I said, look, if we do this, we can tidy these car parking spaces up and make it really clear that, you know, these two are for this flat, these two are for this flat, etc. And they loved it. So we paid our money each, we split the leasehold, and now instantly I've got two properties that not only are worth 75,000 rather than 47, 48, but they're now mortgageable. So I've been able to refinance both of them, take that money, pay off the finance investor and use his funds on another deal. And this, having finance available, people who are willing to lend you money on a secured or unsecured basis, is so valuable. I've done videos about this, but I'll do some more videos about that for you, about how to find these people, in fact, if you'd like that, drop a note in the comments and I'll do some videos on how to find finance investors, how to borrow from them, how to have them wanting to lend more, how to have them referring you to their friends and family, etc. But basically those funds were then freed up to no money down deal. In fact, I got cash back when I refinanced. It did take me a while. It took me probably 12 to 18 months in total, but it didn't matter because I didn't have any of my own money in the deal anyway. So it doesn't matter. And I had 5 years on the loan. So when I offered to pay the guy back after 18 months, he was like, oh, I don't know what to do. And I said, don't worry, I'll just re-borrow your funds straight away. And what I did is, when the money went back to him, I carried on paying his interest until I used the funds again a month or two later. And he loved that because it meant that he got his continuous 5 years of interest payments. Guys, if you've enjoyed this episode, if that's opened your eyes to what's possible in terms of no money down investing, people say no money down investing is impossible. That's rubbish, absolute rubbish. We do no money down deals all the time. That's an example of it. You can borrow the money from the vendor, you can borrow the money from someone else, you can do a deal that doesn't require any money at all. This was a good example of that. If you have any questions, pop them in the comments section. If you can subscribe, hit the like button, if you can share this with your contacts, that will really help us to grow the channel. And until next time, happy investing.